Hi everyone. So I hope you guys are doing great and ready to get down to coding this app again, this travel app. So to begin, first off, look in the description of the video, and if you do that, then go ahead and open up that GitHub repository that I put down there for today. So it's going to be the exact same one that we had used last time, and for those of you who didn't have a chance to watch our last part where we started off this app, don't worry, you can actually catch up really quickly by just doing a few git commands and you'll be good to go to continue working on this app. But I definitely recommend going through it because we go through some really good practices for not just this project, but any project that you might work on for any sort of code. So to begin, if you go ahead and click on this, you'll see that I created a new branch called lesson-0. So if you haven't already went ahead and cloned this repository, go ahead and click on this green button that says code and copy this link to clipboard. If you already have and you have the project set up, go ahead and open that up on VS Code right now and launch it on your emulator just so you can have it ready. I already have everything up just so we don't have to waste any time with that. But in the meantime, if you have the project already cloned and set up from last time, go ahead and open it up on your emulator and in VS Code. For those of you who have not, then what you'll need to do is go ahead and copy this GitHub HTTPS link and go ahead and open up a new VS Code, VS Code. After you do that, you can either open up just by right clicking on it and clicking a new window, and you should have a git clone option on the starting screen, or you can go to view after opening up VS Code, command palette, and then typing in git clone. And that should show up as one of the commands. And then if you press enter on that, and then you'll paste that link, and then find a place to put your project. After you've done that, and this should apply for everyone now, go ahead and open up a new terminal, and you'll want to make sure that you have everything up to date with what we've done thus far in the project. And if you had worked on it from the last video, you don't have to do this, but if you have a feeling that you might have fallen behind on any part or might have had some errors in your code, go ahead and run git pull origin, and then you're going to put in lesson-0. And if you run that, it's going to basically merge everything that I've uploaded to GitHub to what you currently have in case you made any errors or you're just trying to catch up. So I'm not going to run that because I'm already all up to date. But if you run that, just a reminder, it's git pull origin and then lesson-0. So after you've done that, you should be all good to go and up to date. And once you have your emulator up, you should see our progress that we've made so far. So comparing that to our little screenshot right here, it's made some decent progress. You have the picture up, and then we have this little area right here that shows a bunch of data and data that we wanted to have, like countries visited, what we want to visit. Now, obviously, these numbers are hard-coded, but if we had time to like create a backend, then we could actually make these numbers make sense, by having some buttons on the different countries that you can add them to a list or something else like that. But for now, these are just hard-coded numbers, nothing special. So just to kind of go over what we did the last time, first we went over all these files that I had added in for you guys along with the basic Flutter stuff, which includes this assets folder, this data and models, these data and models folders inside the lib. And then after that, we also went ahead and deleted everything in main and then left it with nothing but this home widget that we decided to create in its own screen. So remember what I had mentioned, which is that a really good way of organizing your Flutter projects is to create a screens folder in the lib, inside the lib folder, just to kind of hold all your big screens that you will be making. And we'll be making 3: a home, a search, and then a country screen. And then for each of these screens, kind of create its own folder. And then inside this, you'll have basically the file for the screen that you'll have that would be linked to your main or whatever else. And this would contain basically this contains basically everything we need for our home screen. And then from here, we also want to break it down a bit more just so we don't get too cluttered in this home.dart file. We went ahead and we created a visits widget and created a new components folder, which is another really good thing to do for Flutter projects, is that you want to create another folder inside for each of your screens for the different little bits in it. So we created one for this country data, and we're going to create another one today and possibly one more for the searching part. And then after that, we went into the visits and we broke our code down a little bit more, making it a little bit more modularized. So each of these visits items, you're able to pass just 2 pieces of data and you're able to build each of these really easily. And just a reminder, anytime you want to have variables inside a Flutter widget, it goes right underneath or you want to pass data to it. You want to put all the variables that you want to pass to this widget underneath the very first line where it says class and then whatever your widget's called, extend stateless widget. You put your 2 variables and mark them as final. And then underneath that, you'll add this constructor right here, which is just the name of your widget, and then in parentheses and also in braces, you'll put this dot, your variable name, this dot, your other variable name, and everything else. And then from there, you would just pass it in by saying title, colon, whatever it is, basically. So that's just a little summary of what we did last time. So let's go ahead and get started on continuing this project. So I'm going to go ahead and X out this main.dart file and collapse this a bit. So if we take a look at the screenshot, we see that we have a little divider. I'm not going to go ahead and include it because I want to see what this app looks like without it, because I think it might look better. But we're going to now work on this recent searches area where we have this title right here, a button that says see all, and then after that we have this horizontal scrollable list with each of these sort of cards, and that's what the technical term for these things are, where you kind of have this shout underneath it. These are called cards, and we're going to go ahead and try to build all of that today. So the very first thing we're going to do is that we know we're going to need to work in the home.dart file, because remember, this kind of lists everything vertically for our app. And we know that the recent searches sort of widget is going to go underneath it. So we're going to do something a little bit different and kind of jump ahead because we know how this should be structured to a certain extent. So inside your components folder, we're going to go ahead and inside the screens folder, inside home, and then inside the components folder for that home folder, go ahead and create not a new file, but or not a new folder, but a new file. And it's going to be called recent search .dart. And then press enter and it'll go ahead and create that for us. So the next thing we'll want to do is we're going to go ahead and start setting this up, and then we'll add it into the home.dart file in just a sec. But this is how you basically, anytime you know you're going to create a new file in Flutter, it's actually really easy to create your little widget. And all you have to do is to start off making this Flutter file, go ahead and type in st, and then we're going to make a stateless widget. So you can say st and then less. And then the very first option, it says Flutter stateless widget. And if we click enter on that, then it'll automatically sort of fill in some code for us, this little code snippet. So go ahead and type in recent search. That's going to be the name of this widget. And then you can click away after that. So we'll need to import material.dart as well for this file. So go ahead and go over the red squiggly line, click on quick fix, and then import material.dart. And now we're ready to go and working on this part. So before we keep going forward, let's make sure that we'll save this file and then go back over to home.dart. Now in this file, we're going to go ahead and put recent search into this file, into this home file, so that as we make changes in recent.search, it should show up after that. So put a comma after the visits widget that we created and type in recent search. And you should see it kind of auto import, right? Give us an auto import option. So go ahead and click enter on that and add your parentheses. So let's save this file, and nothing should show up because there's nothing really here yet, but let's go ahead and get started. So taking a look at our picture right here, we see that we start off with a title next to a button that's going to be called see all. So we know that since these are next to each other, we're going to have a row, right? But we also know that we're going to have to include this part right underneath it. So we know we have 2 things to worry about. We have to have this section right here with the recent searches in the button on top of this list right here. So we know we need to start off with a column, right? So let's go ahead and delete this container right, that it gives us initially and put in a column. Let me make this text a little bit bigger for everyone and minimize this. So we're going to go ahead and create a column. So for its children, go ahead and type in this children property and open up these brackets for this list. So the next thing we know is that at the very top of this column is that we're going to want this little row right here. So we're going to go ahead and create a row, and it's going to contain some text next to a button. So let's create a row as its first child for this column. Open this up, and then for its children, we're going to want some text first off. And the text that we want to put for this, the first child of this row is going to be recent searches. And then let's go ahead and just save this and see what that looks like. We have a little error here because we have to put a semicolon at the end of this because this is a return statement. Return statements have to end with a semicolon, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and you can see recent searches is now showing up right there. It's nothing fancy right now, but let's go ahead and change that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and add some styling to it. So next to the text that we just put as the string, recent searches, let's put in the style property, and let's change the text style. So inside this text style, let's go ahead and mess around with a few things. Let's start off with its font weight. So the font weight we're going to put as font weight dot bold. So now this bolds our text, and then along with that, let's make it a little bigger. So let's make the font size. So we're going to mess with the font size property. We're going to make it 20. So after we do this, I'm going to go ahead and move things around just so it looks a little nicer. Just bring that down. This should be all right in terms of horizontal length. And then also, let's enter that down as well and tab this over, just to keep everything organized in our project. So if I go ahead and press save now, see that the text looks a lot better now. So we made the text a little bit bigger, and we also made it bold. So now the next thing we want to do is we know that there's going to be a button on the other side of it. So we'll work out spacing afterwards for this row, but let's go ahead and, oops, wrong area. But underneath this text widget, let's go ahead and create a flat button, because if you look at it, there's no border around this button. So we kind of want it, and there's no shadow. So we just want it to be flat on the page and kind of just be something that someone can click on. So we're going to go ahead and make a flat button, which is one of our two types of buttons. It's flat and raised. And let's open up these parentheses and create our onPress function. Now, because of time, we're not really going to be able to implement the See All button, but we're just going to include it and make it clickable just for aesthetics. So we're just going to create this onPress function that's going to be empty. And then along with that, let's go ahead and now also make its child. So what goes inside this button? Remember that the child of any sort of widget is always going to be what goes inside it. That's the easiest way to think about it. So what goes inside this button? It's going to be some text. We go ahead and look at it, it says just see all, right? So we're going to go ahead and open up this text. I'm going to say see all. And then I know that the style is, or the text font size is going to be really small, so I'm going to go ahead and increase that right now. So along with see all, I want the style to be including a font size of, let's make it 16. See how that looks. And if I click save, we see the see all show up, and if we click on it, on our emulator, see that it's actually clickable. It has a little splash effect. It's a little laggy, but that's just the emulator. So as you can see, it looks pretty good right now, but obviously the spacing doesn't match up with what we have on over here. We see how they're as far apart away from each other as they can be. So the row actually gives us a way to make that sort of spacing. So if we go all the way back up to the top, back up to this row, and I open this up, or underneath the inside the row above the children property, let's go ahead and change its main axis alignment. So the main axis alignment, which is a property for a row, changes basically how it spaces horizontally. So you have, for a row, a main axis is horizontal, and for a column, the main axis is vertical. And then you also have cross-axis, which are the opposites. So for a row, its cross-axis will be vertical, basically. So we're going to change the main axis alignment. And the main axis alignment, if we hover over this, see that it wants a main axis alignment widget. And that's the easiest way. Anytime you're working with looking at different properties, and you want to set one of them to something else, you can just hover over it, and it gives you a description for it. And it also gives you what its return value is at the very beginning of it. This is sort of blocking your view, but it should be easier to see on your screen. So the main axis alignment, which is a type of widget, has a couple preset values. We have center, end, space around, space between, space evenly, and start. So start brings it all the way to the left. Space evenly kind of spaces them as like an even distance away from each other along with the sides. And you should definitely mess around with all of these if you want. Just get a feel for how they each work. But the one we want is space between, which basically spaces them as far apart from each other as possible. So let's go ahead and save this, and you see that now they're spaced as far apart as we want them to. But they're also now touching the very far edges, which is not really looking so great either. So that means we're going to need to add a little bit of padding to this row as well. And luckily, it's really easy to do that in any IDE with Flutter. So just click on row now, and click on this light bulb right here. And one of our options that we can, of little snippets that we can use that makes it really easy to add things in, is we can wrap this with a padding. So if we do that, it automatically shifts everything down for us, which is really nice, and it adds a little padding widget around it. It makes the child this row that we had hovered over. So let's go ahead and delete this for its padding right now, because we'll want to set it to something else. So a padding expects an edge inset, and if we hover over it, you can see that yourself. It expects an edge inset's geometry. So, and that's just a fancy term for how to set your spacing, basically. So we say edge, and then insets, and then put a dot. We get a few options. We have how we want it on all sides, from LTRB, which basically stands for from left, right, from left, top, right, bottom. And then also there's a few other ones as well you can have just for only. So if you only want it on the bottom, top, and then we also have symmetric. We're going to go ahead and use that one. And symmetric has two options. It allows you to have a double for a vertical and a horizontal. So basically, how you want the spacing on the top and bottom and the sides, basically. So we want some spacing on its horizontal, right? So, and these are named parameters, so we have to put the name first. So horizontal, and they can go in either order as well. So we'll make it horizontal, and we'll add 24 pixels. Go ahead and add a comma at the end of that and click Save. Now that looks a lot better, and we have a little clickable button with recent searches next to it. So if we go ahead and go over to our screenshot, we now have this top part done. And let's go ahead and get this horizontal scrollable bar set up now. So the one thing you can notice about this is that each of these cards look exactly the same. And from there, we can kind of guess that, you know what, this is probably going to be the exact same thing. Just like what we did up here with the visits thing, with each of these visits items, each of these are going to be, we're going to create a sort of generic card for each of these. And all we have to do is just pass in just a really simple, a couple pieces of data, and they should be able to form this flag and put in their name as well. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So we know that underneath this row, basically, or underneath this padding, because we want to go back inside this column. And we can obviously extract this if we felt like it, all this padding into its own little widget. And you know what, let's go ahead and just do that just to make it a little easier to look at. So let's go ahead and make it, extract this widget. And then let's just call it search, or let's just call it title and we'll just call it title for now. And now everything's a little bit more organized, and we can just look at the column for now. So the next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to start working on this little country card that we have here. And let's go ahead and work on it right here for now, and then we'll kind of start working on the rest of it. So we can see that starting off, this is going to be a row, right? So let's make a row. And then underneath it, inside this row, let's create its children. And then we'll go ahead and open this up and start working on each of its individual components. Just pulling up my notes as well, just to make sure. So the first thing we'll want to do is let's create a specific card. Let's just make one for the United States, for example. And then from there, we'll kind of make it more generic, just so we can have a way to kind of base this off of. So let's first off start by creating a card, because that's exactly what we're working with in this case. So inside this card, we're going to have a few different options, but first we're going to go ahead and work with its child. So its child is going to basically, so the card will fit to whatever the size of its child is, and we kind of want those to be predefined, because as you can see, none of these are a different size whatsoever. So from there, we know that we need to use a container, because a container is a really good way to set predefined sort of sizes, right? Because it has a height and a width property. So for this container's height, let's go ahead and make it 140. Let's make the width 160. And these numbers, that it looks like I'm just pulling them out of thin air, but I'm pulling them based on what I have already created. But in reality, the actual process would be a lot of guessing and checking after we make this. After we make this, we would say, oh, this doesn't look so great, or maybe we want to change it up a bit. But it's definitely a big process of just kind of messing around with it until you get something that you like in terms of size. So let's go ahead and save this. And it's kind of hard to see, but you should see this little outline for a card showing up on the far left of your screen, basically on your emulator. You can kind of see the bottom shadow. So for this container's child, if we take a look at our screenshot again, we see that we have a picture on top of a name, right? So what that tells you is that means we're going to want to have a column, right? Because we want an image on top of a title, right? So for the child of this container, let's go ahead and make it a column. After we open this up, let's go ahead and make for its children first an image, right? Let me scroll down a bit. So we're going to use that thing that we used earlier, which is image.asset. And we're going to open up this parentheses. So the first thing for an image asset is that this is kind of being blocked by this right here. But if I hover over this, you should see that it expects a string name, and that's required. So if I go over and I open up this, and I open up my files and go to my assets folder and flags, you see that we have a bunch of different PNGs for countries, right? And each of them are its flags. So the path for this asset in this case is going to be, we're going to put this in a string, assets / flags / and then whatever the country.png is. So the country code for the US is just us.png. So after I do that, then we should see a United States flag kind of show up. But I'm going to wait on that for just this, or let's go ahead and save this and just see what that looks like. So now we see this sort of show up. You notice that the corners are a little rough. They have really pointed corners. We're going to go ahead and fix that in just a sec. But for now, let's go ahead and make the rest of this card. So underneath this assets, let's go ahead and mess around with the size of this picture. So we're going to go ahead and make its height 85 pixels, its width 160 pixels. And then underneath that, we're going to also use this property called fit. So fit basically is how do you want it to adapt to its surroundings, right? So we're going to go ahead and make the fit box, and fit basically expects a box fit. So we're going to make it box fit. We're just going to say fill. So if I save that, nothing really changes for now, but it'll make a difference once we start adding in the text as well. So underneath this image that we just created, and let me minimize this so it's easier to see my code. So inside this column, underneath this image, we're going to now create a container. And this container is just going to contain some text. And the reason we want to contain this text is because it allows us to wrap it, if you recall. Because if you look at this, there might be a case where a name is going to be super, super long. Like a country like United Arab Emirates is a really long name and it won't fit in the space horizontally whatsoever. So we're going to want to create a container with a width. We're going to make that 140 because that's just the size of our appropriate size, kind of. So we get about 20 or 10 pixels of margin on either side because the in total width is 160. So underneath that, we're going to now just make a child, and we'll add some padding if it doesn't look great afterwards. And for this text, we'll just say United States. And I already know this is going to be small, and I'm sure you guys are used to seeing really small text just come from text naturally because that's just the default. So we're going to go ahead and change the style as well. But let's also make sure that since it might wrap, we'll want to make sure the text align is center as well. It would be a text align dot center, and I misspelled that. So let me just add in an X. I'm going to space this out a little bit. So underneath this text align, let's add in some style, and we're going to use a text style widget again, as I'm sure you guys are hopefully getting used to. And we're going to go ahead and make the font size 16, and we're going to make the font weight. And font weight expects a font weight widget. And we're going to make it bold. If we go ahead and save that, you see United States show up right underneath this image. So let's go ahead and add some padding because it's basically hugging the image right above it. So inside this container, containers actually have a padding widget, so we don't actually have to wrap a padding in around anything, or a padding property. So for padding for this container, we're going to have it as edge insets, because that's what padding and margin always expect. It's an edge insets geometry object. And for edge insets, we're going to set the symmetry, or we're going to make it symmetric. We're going to add some vertical spacing, and we're just going to make it 8 pixels. If we save that, it looks a lot better than it did before. So now that we kind of have the basis for this card, we're going to have to start messing around with it a little bit just to make it look a little bit better. Because if you notice, the tops are kind of are not really rounded, while the bottom corners definitely are. So we're going to go up to the top, back to this card, and we're going to mess around with some things. So first off, you notice that the bottom of the card is kind of big, right, in terms of height. So we're going to go ahead and also add some margin to this. So margin for a card is a little strange because it actually that's how you basically change the size of your card. So we're going to set it to edge insets symmetric because we want it to be even on the top and bottom and the sides. So we're going to set the horizontal to 10 and the vertical to 12. And then we'll put a comma after that. And I forgot to add a colon right there. So we go ahead and save that. Notice that we now have some margins around the sides, so it's a little bit spaced away from the side, from the corner now. Now along with that, we're going to go ahead and try to round off the corners. So this is a kind of specific widget, and I don't expect you or anyone else, including myself, to ever remember to use this widget, but it's something that you can just Google and you'll find someone will tell you that this is a great widget to kind of make a border on anything. So if we go ahead and around this column, inside this, or around the container actually, if we wrap this with a widget, so remember, click on container, and then click on this light bulb, and we wrap this with a widget. There's a little bit of weird spacing, but I'm just going to do Control Z, and it fixes it for me. And I'm going to change this widget to something called a clip, and then R rect. So what this does is it kind of clips the border, it allows us to mess with the border and clip whatever its child is to fit this border. So we're going to go ahead, and it has a property called border radius, and border radius has a expects a border radius widget. So we're going to say border radius, and then if we put a period after that, we have a few simple options. We're going to go ahead and make that circular and set it to equal to 6. So we go ahead and save that. You see that now the corners are really rounded off at the top, and it looks a lot better, and it looks a lot more like what we have over here. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at what we have just to make sure everything's looking about right. And it looks about good, but there is one other thing I want to make sure that we have. So let's go ahead and also make sure that what we have, one second, I'm just taking a look at my notes. It looks just about right. Let me mess around with the height real quick. Let me make that 120. Oh, I see the issue with doing that. I'm going to undo that. So this is about exactly what we would want it to look like at this point. We'll obviously mess around with it a bit more, and it'll look a lot more like this momentarily. But for now, this card is basically what we wanted to start off with, and it's looking pretty good. I want to do one other thing, and I want to make it I want to make it clickable, basically. And the way to do that, it's a little complicated, but if you just follow along, we should be able to make this a clickable widget now by just following along at this point. And then after that, we'll just end it for today, and we'll go ahead and make this a sort of scroll, a horizontal bar starting tomorrow as well, and make this a bit more generic. So the first thing we'll want to do is above or inside this container, or not this container, but above the column, we're going to go ahead and wrap this with a widget as well. I'm going to undo that. So there's a widget called stack. So a stack allows you to sort of put something on top of another. And the reason we want to stack is so we can kind of create a little splash effect every time we click on this. Because right now, if we click on this card, it does nothing. And we want it to kind of operate as a button to open up to the actual country's information. So we need it to be clickable. So we're going to go ahead and make this a stack. So it kind of stacks things on top of one another. So a stack does not actually have a child property. It actually has a children property. So I'm going to go ahead and make children underneath this and open this up. And I'm going to delete this child right here, and I'm going to cut this in. And the reason why is just for a moment. So for this, I'm going to cut this column and paste it in there. So I'm going to go down all the way until I see the column at the very bottom, or the ending parentheses for it. And that's another really great thing about Flutter, is that it tells you which ending corresponds to whichever other one. So it's very nice like that. And then it pasted a little strangely, so I'll have to tab this once more. And then tab this over as well. So now everything looks nice, and we have a column inside the children of this stack. So stack also has a positional, expects a sort of position as well. And what that means is how do you want to be positioned inside this stack. So we're going to go ahead and change this widget right here to positioned, and we're going to make it positioned.fill. And after that, basically what this does is that it sort of fills in the whole stack or the whole card with this first thing. And then underneath that, we're going to do the same thing again. So inside this stack for its children, underneath this position not filled. And what that means is it just fills in the entire container that we're working with. We're going to go ahead and make another positioned. I wish I could spell it. Dot fill. And inside here, we're going to open this up and we're going to have a child. So this is, again, very specific things, and this is basically something I pulled straight off the internet, so you can just copy for this part, because all it is just, it allows us to create a splash effect. So we'll create a material widget, and the material widget is just a very generic widget, so you have the capability of building your own things as well in Flutter. And we're going to have its color be colors.transparent. And the child of this material widget is going to be an inkwell. So an inkwell gives you a splash effect. And the really cool thing about this widget right here, inkwell, is that you can wrap this around anything and it'll generate a splash effect for it. And it'll also come with a sort of on tap field as well. And I'll let you kind of create a button out of basically anything. So that's a benefit of using inkwell. So we go ahead and save this. And now if I click on it, you'll see that we get a whole splash effect just by clicking on it now. So that's actually really cool. So we're able to sort of create our own, a little splash effect and make this work almost like a button now. So besides that, just looking over the code one last time just to make sure everything is looking good. It looks like we've finished this part for today. The next thing that we would do is we would basically make this a very generic sort of field, I guess you could say. So we would basically extract this whole card and make it its own thing. So let's go ahead and just do that real quick just so we can have things ready. So on this card, go ahead and click on this light bulb and select extract widget. I'm going to call this a country card, because it's just a card that is basically supposed to have our country in it. So after I do that, we have this basically taken out, and we'll start working with it starting tomorrow, basically, to make it a bit more generic and fill in our row with a bunch of country cards, basically. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. We'll pick this up tomorrow, or on Friday at 2 o'clock, and hopefully we'll get almost everything else done. My plan is to leave you with a little bit more just so you can try to do things on your own. If not, we'll have one last really short one just to kind of get you to a point where you can get to that in case we don't manage to get too far in the next one either. But again, I really hope you enjoyed this lesson. I don't want to make it get too long, and I hope to see you all on Friday. And I'll be sure to upload this code for you all as well. Thanks. Bye.